Do the people of Ohio care that Republicans in control of the General Assembly and the governor's office are redefining higher education? We'll find out in the November general election, should there be a referendum on the new university reform law. Senate Bill 1 was passed by the GOP supermajority in the legislature and signed into law by Republican Governor Mike DeWine. Present at the signing was Lieutenant Governor Jim Tressel, a former president of Youngstown State University. What will it take to place the repeal question on the ballot? We'll ask our guest today, Dr. Mark Vopat, president of the YSU Ohio Education Association, and Dr. Mandy Fehlbaum, a member of the Faculty Union's Executive Committee. Mark and Mandy are professors with vast experience in higher education. YSU OEA is leading the statewide campaign to repeal SB 1. It's clear Republicans in Columbus are determined to shackle Ohio's public universities and colleges. Why? Because they believe such institutions are cauldrons of liberal brainwashing and wokeism. I'm Bertram Souza, veteran Mahoning Valley journalist and host of the Scribbler Video podcast. Joining me today to discuss the SB 1 repeal effort is my co-host, Dr. Taji Terrell, former professor at YSU. Mark and Mandy, thank you for joining Taji and I to talk about Senate Bill 1, the new higher education reform law that goes into effect later this month.
Before we start, can you just briefly summarize what SB 1 is?
Sure. We can summarize what the 70-page bill is. SB 1 is, it's a multifaceted bill. Part of it is a labor bill, so it takes away the labor rights of faculty members. So the ability to strike, the ability to negotiate on the terms of tenure and retrenchment. So it's a labor bill. The next part is really an anti-DEI bill. So right. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. It removes the ability for universities to give scholarships for women, minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities. That's all part of this bill. It eliminates any programs associated with DEI. So if you're doing training for LGBTQ, for sensitivity training for even veterans who are not a protected class would technically fall under this prohibition. Any kind of centers, groups are also at risk under this anti-DEI bill. So you've got a whole range of organizations or university-sponsored training that's no longer allowed under the bill. Then there are provisions about what we can do or say in the classroom, about presenting a balanced view, supposedly, that we're not doing. At least that's the claim. So there's certain topics that you have to leave up to the student to decide on. So marriage, elections, what are the ones? Abortion, climate change, yes. Marriage. There's a number of provisions here that actually go in and say these are topics that you can't actually take a stand on as factual, but have to leave up to students. So there's those elements of the bill. And then there's a mandatory civics class. So another element of this bill is that this is for the first time ever the state has come in and said, here's a class that all students must take, but we're actually going to tell you the content of that course. So, that is something that we've never seen, the sort of intrusion into the higher ed classroom, not just in the overall running of the university. And then there's the final part. There is also provisions here about getting rid of programs based on certain metrics, right? So 5 graduates per program over a 3-year period. If you don't have enough of these graduates, the program automatically gets canceled. There is supposedly going to be an appeals process, but that still hasn't been laid out there. Right. So right now, you've seen this at the University of Toledo, that they're already complying with the bill before it's actually going into effect. So SB 1 is a sweeping piece of legislation when it comes to higher ed. And there's other things in there as well, but those I think are the big
which is reflective of today's political climate in Ohio. And let me start with this. Since all three of you are heavily invested in higher education, let me play devil's advocate and ask this question. What makes you think that voters in blood red Ohio, Donald Trump country, care enough about universities and colleges to reject Senate Bill 1 the new law that, among other things, prohibits walkouts or strikes by faculty and eliminates DEI. Mark, start with you. Where's...
Well, I think we can get, I think if we get to the buildup of
Sure.
what's in SB1,
Right.
I would say that, though, if you want the punchline, is that this can have for those who are looking at this strictly from an economic standpoint, this could have a huge impact economically on the state. But I think if you take all of those aspects, the impact this is going to have on our ability to attract and retain faculty in Ohio, the diversity, equity and inclusion aspects that are helping support students to be successful in Ohio. The movement, one of the things I didn't mention was the 3-year degrees, that there's a mandate in here that all universities look at moving programs into 3 years, going from 4-year to 3-year, which in my opinion is going to lower both the quality and the prestige of the university degrees in Ohio.
Delegitimize them.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's going to be a problem. So how will law schools, medical schools, graduate schools, how will employers look at students who come out with a 3-year degree over the 4-year? And I think that's going to have an economic impact. So right now, universities in Ohio contribute about $69 billion to the economy. If you start seeing students avoiding Ohio to go to Pennsylvania or Michigan or other states where they don't have these sort of SB1 laws, I think you're going to see an impact on our ability to retain those students in Ohio. You see them going to other schools, which they take their dollars with them. So, there's this sort of, and this comes from the federal government, there are all these international students coming in who are getting free rides, or, that's not what happens.
Exactly.
In fact, they pay more. So they're in net gain. We have, if those students choose to go somewhere else, if Ohio students start going out of state, they're taking their money with them. So minimally, forgetting about, I think, the merits of, our case against this, I think there's an economic impact that you'll see 3-5 years down the road, that if this bill actually does, stay a law in Ohio and it does start to have the impacts that we think it will, there's going to be an economic impact for the people of Ohio. So you don't have to necessarily agree with every aspect of this bill, or disagree with every aspect of it, but I think there's going to be that impact.
Mandy?
I would say that folks in Blood Red, Ohio want what is best for their kids, and generally that is typically seeking higher education. So if the colleges and universities that are closest to their location close because they don't have enough programs, or all the programs have switched to technical degrees and whatnot, that limits their ability to get ahead. Also, this bill would, by curtailing academic freedom, also ends up curtailing the ability for scientific discovery, not just in the social sciences, but the harder sciences as well. So it will impact folks down the line in terms of okay, you might not care right now, but the scientists doing something in order to find the cure for tuberculosis, for instance, no longer has that funding. That's going to impact you on down the line and your family. So, you want an educated society, and you want your doctors to be educated, you want your lawyers to be educated. So it's not just about, okay, let's get rid of higher education overall. Don't you want people in Ohio to have higher education, period? In addition, I've lived in Ohio for 10 years. I grew up in Texas and Oklahoma. But one thing I've learned is the workers' rights run deep in Ohio.
Right.
So I think the workers' rights argument also would really matter to folks in the more Republican areas, given, Ohio is different from right-to-work states in that the ability to strike in order to make workers' issues known is sacrosanct. So I would think that would matter to them as well.
Taji, you were a professor at YSU, and your program was eliminated. What argument are you making when people talk to you about SB1, and former students or wherever, as to why you think this is a wrong way for Ohio to proceed?
Well, another thing SB1 calls for is elimination of small programs. So this will have an impact on the humanities and other interdisciplinary fields. And who are we? I mean, if you cut history, philosophy, religion, or fashion merchandising, then we will have to hire people who have those degrees from other places. And they're also calling for having a technical education. So we are trying to create laborers, basically, because they want technical education, people for the workforce. Right. And I feel like they want to turn Ohio into like the China of the United States to do all the work and the labor, but we won't have any of those, humanities and other small programs. And at the same time, it calls for banning faculty strikes. Right. And I think that sets a precedent on labor rights for everybody. On one hand, we are promoting technical schools and workforce development through the universities now. And on the other hand, we are attacking labor rights. So, what stops them from banning strikes for other laborers in the future?
Part of our concern, too, is that there is the SB 1 is in part what the old SB 5 from a few years ago, where they were attempting to take away all, right. There were a number of labor rights for firefighters and police as well.
That was Kasich's big move.
And I think what you're seeing with SB 1, SB 8, even the budget bill, is that they've taken SB 5, that was, 60% of Ohioans said, yes, we want to protect those labor rights. They took that and they broke it up into small pieces. And so SB 1 is just one part. So if you wanted to go after faculty strikes, you can do it in SB 1. If you want to go after things like Mandy's our grievance chair at the university and the union, she gets release time. I get release time for being president, so I get a 1-course reduction each semester. That's a negotiated thing. We don't have to get it. The university, through negotiations, we get it. SB 8 comes along and says, we're going to ban you from even talking about that. So slowly they're chipping away at these rights, and what I don't understand, I should say, is why other unions aren't saying that that they're going to be next. The K through 12 teachers unions will be next. Then, why not extend this to other unions? Why not ban these same things? So there is a concern here that this is just a way of getting SB 5 back in small pieces, in addition to the DEI, all of the other things that they're talking about. So
they chose a group that is being maligned right now, higher education professionals, and it's a fairly small group as well. But we would just be, the first slice off, and then that worked then, so let's also move on to K-12. Let's also move on to this group and that group. And
it's also an easy group because the Republicans have made the assumption that all faculty are Democrats and all faculty are liberals, and therefore, so what do we punish them? They don't vote for us anyway.
Yeah. Nobody cares about faculty in Ohio.
But on this, the prohibition against walkouts and strikes, it is a slippery slope, as you said. So have other unions reached out to the OEA to say, hey, while we might not agree with everything that goes on college campuses, you are right, they are opening the door to something that could affect us. Have you gotten any response from them?
It's been sort of limited. We've gotten we've actually sort of been contacting other unions, so AFL-CIO, unions like that. The response from some has been that this isn't the hill that we want to die on. That we're waiting for something else down the road. And that was part when we started this. That was the response we got from many. Even within the academic community was, well, we should wait. There'll be something else. But the way in which they're approaching education in Ohio with these each small bills that you're waiting for something that is most likely never going to come. There's not going to be that one bill that you can go after that will represent all of this. So,
or they're going to try to create an amendment that covers everything.
That covers, yeah. So,
and it will be like, as a mixed bag as SB 1 is, to where you'll have some people say, well, I agree with the trustees having just 6-year terms, and I agree with this part of it, but then they disagree with other parts of it. So
we're still reaching out to those other unions. We're still talking. before I came on this podcast, I have a call that I'll be talking with someone from the AFL-CIO later. So we're still in discussions to hopefully get more of them on board. You're seeing a lot of, almost all of the academic unions have jumped on board. The American Federation of Teachers, their locals, the AAUP and OEA, and so we've gotten formal endorsements from a number of those groups in addition to individuals and other groups across Ohio. So it's gone beyond just academic unions. It's gone to a whole host of grassroots organizations who've jumped in. But I also think that when you have a gerrymandered state and when you have a supermajority in Columbus, most people, or I shouldn't say most people, but Columbus doesn't care. Even if we got a lot, because you can see what they're doing with the marijuana laws, and so going back on what the people, the vast majority of Ohioans have said, we agree with the legalization. Now, whether you agree with the legalization of marijuana or not, it seems the State House doesn't care what the majority, even when it's a super majority of people in Ohio or close to it, it doesn't seem to influence.
They ignored the demonstrations, they ignored the hundreds of people, they ignored all of the testimony during hearings on SB1. They just sort of brushed that aside, even from students.
I believe Jerry Serino said, oh, well, we listened to all of that during SB 83, and therefore we did not need to listen to it again because we incorporated the changes. They didn't incorporate the changes. They eliminated all the changes they had made under SB 83 in negotiations because it failed, and just went back to the original and pushed it through because it was the numbers were on their side.
Okay, so as you both know, and Haji, we had YSU President Bill Johnson and his wife Leanne as guests. I asked him about SB1, and he made 2 points. One, he said he has not taken a position on SB1. And then number 2, he said that when he went to a meeting of university presidents, college presidents in Ohio, public institutions, there were different opinions as to what SB1 actually does and how it affects what goes on campuses. Is that a correct reading of it, or is it much more clear-cut and these university presidents not wanting to anger the folks in Columbus and the governor's office and even maybe the feds are sort of being coy?
Yes.
Is
that the answer you're looking for?
Yes.
I can say 2 things. One, I think that not taking a position in this case, unfortunately, is taking a position. So I understand the president's reluctance to say something publicly, but I also say that by not saying anything, there's a tacit agreement with this. Now, why that's the case, I don't know. I have, as far as the second part, and these are probably related. One, yes, the bill is so vague on what. In fact, it does not in any way in here define diversity, equity, and inclusion. It doesn't ever tell you what the definition is. So if you read the bill, you won't find a definition of it. You'll find examples of things that they don't like. So it's clear that there's an ideological push. Here are the topics we want, that you have to leave open in some sense. So there is, in that sense, no, there isn't. I have spoken with some administrators. I've heard from other schools as well. That the provost presidents and those of the universities across Ohio are meeting regularly to figure out how to interpret the bill, because they do not know what falls under, whether this particular type of program falls under. Does this require the changing of language? What student groups can exist? Can they receive funding? Can we have student groups that are would fall under diversity, equity, and inclusion, but can those groups receive funding from the university for activities, or can they just exist, right? So we can't stop them from getting together, but we also don't have to give them any support like other organizations. Can we recognize them?
I believe presidents are also reluctant to fight back because it states in the bill that if they are found in non-compliance, it risks their state share of instruction. So even if they could fight back and say, no, we demand on keeping our women's center on campus, not that YSU has one, they would lose their state share of instruction.
I mean, it's a very mafia type approach to, no, you can do whatever you want.
Yes.
But you might not have your funding, right?
Exactly.
And so I do think, to your point at the beginning, I do think, and this is across Ohio, if you look at the number of presidents who've come out, I think Kent State University President Daikin, I believe it's pronounced his name, I might be getting that wrong. He was one of the few presidents who came out and said this is going to cost Kent State $1.5 to $2 million to comply with this bill. And at a time when Kent State's facing budget shortfalls and you're having their difficulties. So he's been the only one, and looking at Ohio State and the very big schools, Cincinnati, the fact that those presidents haven't said anything, the fact that those boards haven't said anything suggests, and this is just speculation on my part, but suggests that there's definitely pressure coming from Columbus. Don't speak up against this. Don't speak against the bill. Don't come out publicly against this because your funding is in jeopardy. And Senator Serino's been pretty blunt about this in his speech to the City Club that, schools that don't comply, they're gonna face, he's from the budget office, we're gonna make sure that things happen. And so, or from the budget committee, I should say. So, is this going on in the background? I can only speculate, but I suspect that many of these schools are afraid that if they push back on any one issue, they'll be seen to be in non-compliance, and then we'll somehow lose funding.
And then, of course, the presidents all watched the signing ceremony when Republican Mike DeWine signed the bill into law, and Jim Tressel standing there, a former president of YSU, a former vice president of student success at the University of Akron.
Somebody, a champion of diversity,
absolutely.
Equity, and inclusion.
And then I was telling Mark before it began here that when I did the exit interview with him after he stepped down as president, he was he sang the praises of diversity, equity, inclusion. He talked about the programs that he initiated and he supported because of how important that was. And yet here he is, somebody who knows what goes on college campuses and didn't say a word. Now, the cynic in me says, yes, he's preparing to run for governor and therefore doesn't want to anger the Donald Trump Republican base in Ohio. But even so, at some point, you have to stand up to your beliefs.
Bill Johnson, on our podcast, he said he wouldn't take a position on SB1, but he also made it very clear that this petition campaign was completely separate from the university. He had nothing to do with it. It was a faculty-led petition.
Right.
And I believe he might have posted on LinkedIn, in fact, about how he was proud of SB1 getting signed. So he's not taking a position, wink.
So what prompted the YSUOEA to take the lead on this?
It was me.
We've been talking about it when the bill was going through. We had several conversations, as the bill's going through, and I went down for one of the protests. I was there when they were debating in the House. Mandy been talking, sent testimony. We've been talking quite a bit, and at a certain point, it was just sort of, as we're talking, it's like, well, what's left? And it's like, well, referendum. That's the only thing, right?
We were waiting for another group that had infrastructure and funding to come forward, thinking oh, well, they have it down, they'll take care of it. And we, as soon as it was signed, we waited, I think, a week and a half, 2 weeks, trying to find someone to help us craft the language or say hey, do you need help crafting the language of the petition? And no one stepped forward. They talked about how expensive it would be in the millions and millions of dollars, and it's yes, but we need to get the ball rolling now because there's a 90-day period from the time it is signed to collect all the signatures that are needed. So the process is, bill gets signed, then you have to collect 1,000 signatures on a preliminary petition.
Right.
We collected over 6,200 signatures. But the petition language was a matter of me sitting down with the bill on one tab, and then the summary from Honesty for Ohio Education, which I trust and has endorsed our campaign, on another, and then an open Word document, as well as, I think it had a fourth thing open, which was a previous state referendum that happened, and being okay, this is how it is structured. I need tiny print up here, and this, the numbers and all this other stuff, and then just going straight forward and saying, without any sort of bias, yes, bias.
A fair presentation.
A fair and truthful presentation of the bill, which ends up confusing people when I try to get them to sign the petition. But in any case, fair and truthful presentation, and then it's 6 pages long, and then getting, I have spoken with a lawyer who has experience with state referendums, and he was like, you need to include the law in there as well. And I'm like, okay, so tiny versions of the law in the bill so that it's at least included. And then signatures. And what we did for the first one was just have it as a PDF. Someone says, let me collect signatures here. Boom, boom, boom. Getting signatures, and then all of us coming together across the state to get them turned in.
I mean, I think it's important to note that the people who started this were with their own printers. I mean, literally getting the PDF, printing it up on their own dime, and then going out and collecting signatures. So those 6,000 signatures were done with people who literally sitting at home or wherever and printing that up. So it wasn't, this was not us. We didn't have a big pile of petitions. It was send them around. And they were all over the state. Once this came out, I had contacted a bunch of a group of the union leaders from all the universities, and told them that this was what was going on, that the petition had been put together, and they said, can you send it? And so various people and their members started
we were like, okay, drop off your petitions here, like at Mark's house, and another professor's house in Columbus, and then another professor's house in Cincinnati, and then just getting them all caravanned into Columbus. And we turned in 4 boxes of petitions, and we're like, okay. Then it was a matter of waiting 10 business days. And we got the approval in the late afternoon of May 5th, and we hit the ground running, creating, with the approved certified petition, the petitions numbered in a certain way, and getting the infrastructure set up of having regional captains and petition captains and volunteers under them, and doing trainings. And so
the petition drive has now begun.
Yes, we have 18.
We've been well underway, and it really was a very quick turnaround. I mean, she was doing a lot more.
I had contacted union printing presses beforehand, but I'm like, I can't really tell you what to expect, but would you be able to print like 1,000 petitions? And they're like, yes, maybe.
But without actually having a petition, because you don't know what the state is going to tell you have to change. So yeah, it was actually a huge. I mean, Mandy was busting her behind to get a lot of the stuff sent out. It was Easter Sunday and we were texting back and forth, and our other colleague, Krishana, who was also at YSU, I was dropping petitions at her house because she was driving down with Mandy. But I had people Easter Sunday coming to my house and dropping off, multiple people coming with, bags of petitions and dropping them off for us. So it was, on one hand, it was a real scramble because we were surprised to get it, but also we knew that we had a really active group of individuals who were ready to go. Passionate, and willing to do on the holiday, coming and,
given the passion that people showed during the demonstrations against SB1, I knew that there were people there that we just needed to mobilize. It was just a matter of getting them together in one spot and giving them directions. And I think we're in a good spot right now in terms of the infrastructure.
So what's the deadline for submitting the...
We are turning in all the petitions on June 25th. Now, one thing that the Secretary of State requires is that every single individual petition has to be scanned. So we have to present both a hard drive and the physical copies of the petitions.
So you're not doing anything online. Every individual has to sign it.
They do not allow us to do online.
Hats off to our volunteers, because they are all, everything has to be done in person. So they are out there, running around at every event you can imagine. They're holding things at libraries. They're having drive-through signings on weekends at places, at coffee shops, at libraries. So they've been fantastic. The volunteers have been fantastic.
You had to have 1,000 signatures initially.
Yes.
And now, how many signatures do you need to collect?
It's 248,092 valid signatures from 44 counties in Ohio.
Okay.
Ohio.
You have to get 3% threshold in 44 of the 88 counties. So it's just like, even if you're not one of those 44, your signature still counts toward the 248,092 signatures. But
have you targeted the 44 counties?
We're basically just like whichever 44 come first. We're not saying like, of course it would be nice to be able to like set up in Noble County, which has like 188 signatures required or something, but that's also a tough ask because it is very rural and spread out, and so I've been weighing my decisions in terms of like, okay, do I go and like sit down there for a weekend, or do I focus on Mahoning County and try and collect signatures there? So,
you talked about giving an honest evaluation, an honest appraisal of what you're attempting to do. So, people who have the petitions and are standing out there urging somebody to sign the petition, what are they telling the prospective signatures?
We've got I guess there's two things. One, a lot of the individuals who are part of this are very well informed. They understand what's going on in the bill. They don't like what they saw when it was being proposed. There was a lot of publicity about it. We've done training. Mandy set up training for the people with petitions. We also have sort of fact sheets, like here's what's in the bill, so that volunteers can have that with them if someone asks a question. And then part of what I've been doing, while Mandy's been doing the organizational work, part of what I've been doing is going out and speaking to groups who want to know more about the bill. So there's large groups who've been saying, various Democratic organizations, independent groups have had me out to say, okay, can you tell us what's in the bill, why you object to it, what do you see the consequences? So there's been an education campaign. We have a Substack newsletter. We have social media that has a little bit of information along with where you can sign. So we've been sort of educating in a number of outlets, aside from actually having meetings with petitioners, people who are going to distribute the petitions. So that's part of how it's done. But a lot of the people who are doing this, they've sat down. Some of them have read through the entire bill, the 70 pages of it. Others have looked at the summaries that have been put together and said, there's so much in. It's, as I've told a number of groups, there is so much in this bill. It's almost impossible to not find something that you don't like. There's so many things that they're going after that if you're in labor, there's anti-labor. If you are really about diversity and inclusion, there's tons on diversity and inclusion. If you don't like state intervention in higher ed or the state imposition of views or ideology, it's in the bill.
Or you have someone coming up to you, or you're trying to get someone to sign, you say like, do you want voters to decide the future of higher education in Ohio? That's what it comes down to. It's either we go along with what Jerry Serino used the model language, I won't say plagiarized, but he used the model language quite heavily from the National Association of Scholars, which is not even based in Ohio. Do you want those people making the decisions for higher education in Ohio, or do you want the voters to make it? So they don't even have to agree against or be against Senate Bill 1. It's just, do you want the voters to decide, the people of Ohio, or do you want the super gerrymandered General Assembly to make that decision?
And it seems like your whole petition campaign is being led by individual Ohio voters. I mean, you personally started it, and everybody is doing something to get signatures. I mean, I had to go to one of the coffee shops to sign in the first step. You're telling us that people are informed and they respond well, but I mean, my experience is that a lot of people don't really read every single bill that passes. They don't follow the news, and they have no clue how those bills may impact them personally, and they don't care. And honestly, it's hard to follow every single bill. I mean, there's so much out there. Nobody has the time. So if you were talking to one of these people who don't care about this, they don't know anything, how would you describe how SB1 would impact them personally? What is the most misunderstood part of SB1 by the general public?
One, I just tell them, watch this program. That's easier. Then it's a lot easier than actually talk. What's the most misunderstood part of? I guess that's a tough question, because there's a political. If you ask me from a political standpoint, that's one answer. So what is the rationale, the justification for the reform, quote unquote, of higher ed in Ohio? Well, and again, not to pick on Senator Serino, but Senator Serino has put himself out there as the main proponent, and he's the one who produced this bill. The claim is that there's this widespread indoctrination, liberal bias, professors are the enemy. That's it's coming right from the federal with J.D. Vance. That's the view, that we have these rogue professors who are taking over higher ed, and they're impacting the quality of higher ed in Ohio or something like that. And the truth is that there's absolutely no basis in fact. Now, if you look at studies, yes, there does tend to be a liberal leaning of the political leaning, but the arguments being made that, just because you're liberal, you can't teach science without bias. Just because you're liberal, you can't teach math or computer science, or for that matter, philosophy or sociology or anything else.
Couldn't you say that for a conservative person too? I mean, you're conservative, so you can't be unbiased.
and that's actually my point, is that, look, you could say that, well, yes, and in fact, if you look at our campus, I'm willing to bet that 60+% of our campus are Christians. So it's obvious they can't teach anything without a Christian bias. And clearly we don't see it. So the argument is very bad. So for all the talk about universities should be teaching critical thinking and thought, what I'm seeing is, the last thing I saw was that Senator Serino was claiming that all of the people who've come to the protests, all the students, are getting extra credit. Now, how do you know that? They're either being paid or they're getting extra credit. How do you know that? I know it intuitively. Okay, that wouldn't stand up in my philosophy course. It wouldn't stand up in her sociology course, I'm sure. It wouldn't. So if that's the reasoning, what we're seeing is that there's a lot politically, they're trying to create a narrative of this is what's going on at the university. So that's one thing I think is happening. How we counter that, I think honestly, first of all, I think we do a disservice to Ohioans, that there aren't enough Ohioans who know or who've gone to university or have children who've gone to university or people they know, that I think a lot of them know that this seems to be a lot of rhetoric, that there's not a lot of fact with this. So but I also think that it's easy for someone to say, if you like worker rights. I mean, Mandy mentioned this. I think Mandy's completely right about this, that there are enough people in Ohio, regardless of how, I would argue Ohio's a purple state, but it's been gerrymandered red. So I don't think it's actually a red state. I think it's a purple state. And I think there's plenty of people who, unions who endorse Trump. So if you tell me there's a union and I tell the union, look, they're going after your union rights, I don't think they care one way or the other whether, I think they're going to look at this and say, that's enough in this bill for me to say, I don't care about that other stuff. Maybe I'm not interested in universities, but I am interested in my union rights. I might not care. I might not really be in favor of diversity, equity, and inclusion or whatever those programs are, but I don't want to lose students to other states, and I don't want international students to go, because that's a moneymaker for me. Those are the buildings I'm putting up, the dorms I'm maintaining.
I think my daughter has a right to get a scholarship for
But that's the other one. I think when you start to look at the minority scholarships, but also the women's scholarship, women in STEM, suddenly you've got a daughter. My daughter did robotics when she was in high school. I don't think you'd want to go, regardless of what my political convictions might be. Wait a minute, you're taking away a scholarship for my daughter?
And I want as a veteran, I'm not a veteran, but as a veteran, I would want my professors to have received warrior training, which is a special training that we can opt into as professors to know, these are the sorts of obstacles that active duty and veterans face in the classroom, and this is how you can be mindful of it. Those sorts of programs are diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I think that's really misunderstood.
Yeah,
too.
there are very easy ways, I think, to look at someone and say, "Why? How's this going to affect you?" Well, and the other thing, look, at the end of the day, we've got to acknowledge that education is a social good. So it's not just, we want to have the strongest higher ed system. We want to have the highest education, the strongest education system in general, which Ohio is failing miserably at. But at the same time, do you really want to lose those workers? Do you really want people to go to another state? Do you want a system of higher ed that is not respected? That's going to have an impact for everyone. So,
when you talk about workers' rights and the concerns of workers who might not really care about higher education, but they see the slippery slope, a natural ally would be the Ohio Democratic Party or, county Democratic parties. So what kind of help are you getting from the Ohio Democratic Party or local Democratic organizations? And talk
a lot.
Yes, many of them have endorsed our campaign. I had someone reached out from the party itself to take she wants to schedule a call with me pretty soon. So I think
the Ohio Young Democrats have been fantastic.
Ohio.
The Young Democrats have been out there. They're posting on social media. They're doing petition signings at various events. So they've been fantastic.
Yeah, I think one of the struggles of them getting more on board right now is because they don't have a party chair in Ohio right now. So as soon as they get that, then it might be a little bit easier for them to do like the final push at the end of the campaign. I don't know when they vote on that, but
former Minority Speaker Russo and Munari, both are holding a fundraiser, petition signing event. There are other individuals who are signing who are at their campaign, when they're campaigning, or just pushing it at various events when they're going to speak. So a lot of the county parties have already endorsed us, and they're providing signing locations, and they're saying if you need scanning help or you need so they've been supportive. The county at the county level, it's definitely been supportive.
Are you seeing support from students, staff, or any other administrators?
Students, to a certain extent, on individual levels. The Ohio Student Association is sort of taking a step back from activism this summer, which is understandable. They've fought really hard during the school year. Nevertheless, we are having students involved. We're having especially grad students involved.
Medical students.
Mm-hmm.
With the campuses relatively deserted, it's harder to get students as organizations together because they're all over the place. But in terms of student support, I think there's overwhelming student support. If the testimony that was given down there is any indication, and the protests are any indication, I don't think there's many Ohio students who are in favor of SB1.
Because you're involved in the campaign, obviously, you have to be cautious as to how you portray not only SB1, but also the campaign and how all of that. But there's no doubt that, in my mind, this is a dumbing down of higher education in Ohio. And my question is, has anyone talked about, here on the one hand you have these right-wing Republicans who want to dismantle higher education as we've known it, and on the other hand you have these chip manufacturers who are building these huge plants in Columbus, who are looking for high-tech people. In fact, the governor just announced that they're going to go out and try and recruit college-educated students and also workers. There aren't enough in Ohio, so even companies are stealing from each other. I mean, doesn't that sound sort of ironic that on the one hand, Ohio wants to be a leader in high tech and the new economy, and on the other hand, you've got these legislators who want to take us back to the dark ages as far as higher ed goes?
It's quite a paradox, and I would add that it goes back to what's considered valuable in a higher education, in a college degree. So I think legislators who are pro SB1 would also be pro, aside from the civics class, getting rid of any other sort of, you have the civics class and then you have your trainings, and that's all you need.
Right.
And it's like, no, there's value to music and art and humanities and being able to write well and not just relying on AI to write all your papers and things like that. There's a disservice to students, I believe, when we devalue the humanities and social sciences, and we are biased because we are in humanities and social sciences, but nevertheless, those are important aspects to be well-rounded and not just be essentially a cog in the machine.
And you want people to think outside the box. So even if you have a strong, MIT doesn't get rid of their philosophy program or their sociology or their anthropology because the computer science student that has philosophy is going to be a better computer scientist. That being able to think outside your discipline, look at things from different perspectives. Don't we want people who are working in public health, nurses and so forth, to have understanding of groups and sociology, right? So when you talk about the devaluing of it or the lowering of the quality of education, those same companies that are coming in, they want those well-rounded thinkers, right? They want those out-of-the-box thinkers. They want those problem solvers. And you don't get that when you start to treat higher ed in the way that SB1 does and that the state does. Here's another irony, is that every board of trustees, all the boards of trustees in Ohio have been appointed by Republican governors.
Yes.
At this point, there's no board member at any university. Every president has either been hired by or had their contract renewed by these boards. So they've had control of higher ed for a very long time. They are the ones. So if you want to make the argument that there's this indoctrination or wokeness or whatever, we need to combat it, which I think is ironically going to make the universities worse. But they were the ones who are in charge of how the universities are run. And it strikes me as odd that you suddenly say, we have no control over the university but we have complete control over the university system. They control the budget, they control the boards right now, they control the presidents that are put in those positions, and yet somehow there's this rampant indoctrination.
It's all that
going.
free thinking.
It's all that free thinking, and which is the very thing you just mentioned. It's like, but isn't that exactly what we want? Is the free? So I don't understand, and that's why I have a hard time sort of processing what's going on sometimes, because I'm like, I don't understand what this is unless it's an ideological push of some sort that it's a control or something, but it doesn't help higher ed. It's gonna make it worse.
Your point about the Board of Trustees all being appointed by Republican governors was played out at YSU with the appointment of Bill Johnson, a non-academic, no doctorate degree, and a big Donald Trump supporter who parroted a lot of Donald Trump's ideas. And here he was, presented as the next president of Youngstown State University, despite a lot of concerns being voiced by a lot of people about how, what does it say about the quality of education at YSU when you have somebody who is a right-wing politician being appointed to be president. And there were no apologies from them, and in fact, a majority of them didn't even say anything during the appointment process.
Which also, seeing that, it seems that, the claims that there are all these things going on campus just ring hollow, right? I mean, if you have that kind of control, if you have the kind of authority, then, this is why I think even some of my conservative colleagues say they don't like SB 1, because there's things in here too about sort of filing grievances with professors if they don't feel that the classroom has been balanced. That applies equally well to conservative professors as well as liberals. So if you go into so there are plenty of conservative professors across the state who are saying, I don't want this because the same sorts of grievances could be filed against me and I could be brought, and our students tend to be even more liberal than the professors a lot of times. So if that's the case, then they're equally at risk of having to go through, these sort of bringing up on, a claim against them, and they have to go through review and all that kind of thing. So, and we're not sure what that process is going to look like. But the irony is that the claim that, these professors are afraid to speak or they're afraid of losing their job, who has the authority to fire them? The boards and the presidents and the administrations that have all been appointed by Republicans. So what are you afraid? I don't understand what you're afraid of. If anybody should be afraid, it should be those of us who would self-identify as liberals or progressives or something like that. So it seems to me that again, there's a lot here that just doesn't follow. That that I don't see the reasoning or the rationale behind this bill. The view is a little bit just ridiculous, right? And President Johnson, who I remember seeing him on this broadcast, has said, look, when asked the question about indoctrination, I think he said, well, now that he's been here, he's like, well,
exactly.
Our professors are good at preventing both sides, and I give him credit. I mean, that it shows that you come in and he learned what the university was like, and he's I'm sure there was a learning curve for him, but over the last 2 years, where is this rampant? I mean, where's the rampant indoctrination? Where is the And presumably he's saying, well, you know what? Maybe at least at YSU, maybe he can't speak for other universities. At least at YSU, this isn't an issue.
He also claimed that majority of YSU faculty were conservatives. So he made that clear. He didn't see any indoctrination because they're all conservative faculty.
Which it's funny because there's a recent study that I was looking at that took the social media accounts of professors at universities across the United States, and so they scraped the Twitter posts of those individuals, and it turns out that while the majority of faculty still are liberal, it's about 48% or 56%, as high as 56%, depending on public universities. that there are moderates and conservative and right, and that's liberal, and then there's really the progressive, like sort of left wing, the way this person broke out the study. So one, they said that there's that. Two, no study has shown that there's any kind of indoctrination, widespread indoctrination so the person in the study also cited the other studies. But then interestingly, the only area in which there did seem to be some sort of bias was conservative faculty members being unwilling to work with liberal faculty. So it turns out that in the hiring of faculty, there was no liberal bias in the hiring, that liberal faculty members tend to be open to faculty members who have different views, but that when it came to collaboration and work, that conservative faculty members tend to be less likely to engage and more likely to view the research of their liberal colleagues as not being as good. So it's interesting that there's more bias of conservative, and there's also a certain amount of self-selection going on, right? That when you're hearing at the federal level and even the state level about how bad higher ed is and how liberal biased it, then why would a conservative student want to pursue a graduate degree and go in academia? So they tend to self-select out, and I think some of that's because of the rhetoric, because they're being told over and over that you don't have a place in higher ed, or that it's so bad for conservatives, and then they don't go in, and then the complaint is, why aren't there more conservatives in higher ed? And I go, well, maybe if you stop talking so badly about higher ed, if you stop putting down higher ed, maybe more conservative students would go into that.
But yet you have a president who has made no secret of the fact that he is attacking higher education, attacking the big schools. Because
you mean President Trump?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
sorry.
I wanted to clarify. I'm just like, what?
President Trump.
Yeah.
He's attacking higher ed, and yet, it seems that he doesn't recognize the kind of devaluation of higher education and what's that doing around the world. Because if you look at other countries who are now reaching out to researchers at Harvard and Yale and all and saying, hey, you want to continue your research, come see us.
Well, he doesn't strike me as someone who considers the unintended consequences, let alone the intended consequences of his rhetoric.
No, but what is driving this? Why is he and other Republicans so opposed to higher education? What is going on in this country?
I mean, look, this is going beyond part of my expertise, but I really think that this is a sort of, how democracies die kind of idea, this book written. And one of the things you go after are the intellectuals, right? You go after the higher ed. That you see this in Hungary, right? Mm-hmm. Hungary has apparently it looks like it might be coming out of that. But in all sort of authoritarian states, where do you start? You start by going after the people who are going to object. You go after the people who are going to raise objection, who are going to fight back, who are going to make reasoned arguments, about these things. And I just see that as those are the ones that stand up and say, look, there are, I don't think vaccines are a particularly controversial thing, right? I mean, vaccines are good. I think they're a good way of avoiding getting very sick and dying. And I think that, when you have people who stand up and are able to speak to that, medical professionals and academics and others say, look, no, what you're saying is wrong. That's not what's going on. I think that if you're looking to run an authoritarian state, you have to get rid of the people who can object to you and can object to you in a way that's going to be compelling.
That happens in every country.
And an educated populace is more easier to control.
Right.
So, and you deprive them of the information that they need, and then you say, my information is the only information you need. You don't need any other points of view. The other points of view are fake news or wrong or the world is flat, the sky is green, that sort of thing. And anyone who says otherwise is a traitor or treasonous. That's a good way to control the population.
This is the playbook of all authoritarian governments. Yeah. I have a question for you, Mandy.
Yes.
You are a sociology professor, and you teach women's studies, race and gender issues, and of course, SB 1 comes out against those. Do you think it will have a chilling effect on your class, your students, when you're discussing race, gender, and inequality in the classroom?
This is something that I've thought about a lot, because there is the temptation there to just put my nose to the ground and not teach things that will broaden their minds or expose them to different points of view, or just essentially give them the textbook and say, like, you can teach yourself, essentially, rather than my sharing points of view. And I don't think the students will necessarily...
example of a topic that would...
So I teach this book called The Turnaway Study in my Intro to Women's Studies class, and it is about abortion and how it's a longitudinal nationwide study that looks at women who either received abortions or were turned away from receiving abortions at a certain cutoff point. And basically it's both qualitative and quantitative in that it shares the numbers in terms of what those women's lives were like. So the different trajectories, so the women who received abortions, what their life trajectories were in terms of they did not struggle as much financially as the women who were turned away and ended up having their children, the financial struggles that they faced and the emotional traumas that they may or may not have faced, that sort of thing. And because abortion is considered one of these controversial topics, especially under SB1, it's tempting to like get that out of my syllabus and say, like, I'm not even going to risk it by teaching this. But I think it is such important information for students to have that is scientifically backed, scientifically based. And it's not a matter of like, oh, I'm trying to get them to be pro-choice as opposed to anti-choice. I have students of all across the spectrum in my class. And some of them it changes their mind. Some of them, they don't change their mind. Some of them were pro-choice and then end up being like, you know what, I've reconsidered, I'm not as pro-choice anymore. That's totally fine. I ask the same of all of my students that whatever arguments they make, they back them up by evidence. So it's not my trying to indoctrinate them into a point of view. They can have their point of view and it could be completely opposite to mine. That's fine as long as they back it up with evidence. And it's the same thing in terms of marriage is considered a controversial topic. I teach the family. How can you teach the family without talking about marriage? You can't.
I teach philosophy of the family.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the same. Yeah.
So
but I
it
think
could be a chilling effect on professors in that
that's what I was gonna
they
say,
will
yeah.
self-censor in order to not get in trouble or have a sense of creating a biased environment. Because in SB1, there's a mandatory question on teaching evaluations that says, did this instructor create an atmosphere free of bias?
And sometimes the truth is biased, right? The Holocaust happened.
Right.
It might be that that's a bias that we're going to have, in an ethics class. But again, if somebody denies that, if they think they have the evidence, they did their research, what do we say? I mean, what kind of evaluation? Now, it might be that it's ridiculous, but at the end of the day, someone might come and say, well, no, you didn't. You only presented one side. And you say, well, those aren't legitimate sources.
And it's a yes or no question. They don't get to say, like, yes, and then explain what the bias was. So someone who gets a C in my class at the end and is really upset with me because they got a C in the class, they could say that I created a biased atmosphere, and then presumably an investigation will be opened up against me. That also is not clear in the law. It's like... I mean,
and just to point out what you said at the very beginning, one of the things, why is tenure important? Why is it important that we negotiate on the terms of tenure and retrenchment? Because just a case like this, well, as a tenured professor, go into a classroom. So even if they bring one of us up on, some sort of grievance, right, and we go and defend, well, we have certain protections and procedures in the contracts, as you can't, just because the university says, well, a lot of people don't like what Mandy teaches. She teaches that book and it upsets them, which is another part of this bill. You have to be careful that you don't upset someone based on their race, gender. But Mandy teaches something that upsets people. Maybe Mandy shouldn't teach here. Maybe our new criteria for tenure is that, yes, you have to do your teaching, research, and service, but also we want criteria that if we find that you're upsetting a lot of students or not, making a classroom that makes the students feel good, maybe that's a grounds for starting to move towards getting rid of you. You can't do that now with tenure. We can't do it. But once tenure becomes a board policy, it's all up for grabs. Mandy could suddenly be the person that they decide, well, you know what, you're way too controversial. We don't want that kind of controversy. So it's
I
not
mean,
that you
Or
said anything
close the
wrong.
program.
Right,
Yeah,
or close
the
the
faculty.
and that is really the danger of SB1. That's where you talk about higher ed becoming that really state intrusion, and also it becomes people outside of Mandy's field and my field, board of trustees, who come up with a policy
Well,
that says here's what's going to
Not
happen.
only the Board of Trustees, but it says in SB1 that all of the syllabi have to be publicly available
Right.
within 3 clicks and on the website. And, I have my syllabi publicly available already. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't have anything to hide. People can see. I've been called on it before by a non-student who was like, you have a feminist activism project. You're trying to indoctrinate them into feminism. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. But in any case, just random Joe Schmo can look at what we're teaching and then decide like, oh, well, they're biased, therefore we're going to issue a complaint against them. Now, there are some crazy
When
people
was
in
the
the
last
world.
time any board member, because they're going to have so much power if SB1 becomes law, any board member came into your classroom and sat just to listen to what women's studies is all about,
I mean,
or came into
I've
your
had board
classroom?
members show up to like extracurricular
Right.
events, which
No,
is
but-
wonderful, but not sitting in my class. They're welcome to.
I did have one board member years ago, Ted Roberts.
Yeah.
Who's a
Lawyer.
extremely nice guy, lawyer here in
Right.
Youngstown, Republican,
Yes.
as far as I know.
Yes, he is.
And when he was appointed to the board, he actually sat in on a hiring committee for the dean of the college, what was then the College of Arts and Sciences.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the committee with me, and there were a bunch of us, and we had at that time Zoom interviews we were doing. So we got narrowed it down to something like, I think it was 10 candidates that we were going to narrow down to bring to campus. And in the process, there's a very specific process. By the way, SB1 says we can't discriminate on this and this and this. Well, we've always been unable to. There's laws already.
Yeah.
But setting that aside for a minute. So we arranged we arranged the members of the hiring committee would be sitting there with questions. Each asked one question, one follow-up. We go around the room. And so we had the first person came in and we asked a question. And then when I got my answer, I asked a follow-up and another one. And at the end of the day of our first round of interviews, Ted Roberts, who was sitting next to me, looked at me. He goes, "You guys were brutal." And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, "The question, like you didn't let him off the hook. Like you asked the question, and then you just went." And I said, well, yeah. What did you expect? And he goes, "Well, I mean, I just thought faculty would be more. It's more, kind of like I don't know, more huggy, kumbaya." And I looked at him and I said to him, I go, "Ted, this person is going to be in charge of my college.
Right.
They're going to make decisions about funding. They're going to make decisions about programs. These are not people. I mean, we're not here to hire people because we like them. We want to make sure that they are going to best represent the interests of this college." And he goes, "I got to tell you, he told me I have a lot more respect for it because I didn't realize just how." And I said, "If you thought this was hard with the dean, you should sit on a faculty hiring session because a
Exactly.
faculty session where someone's presenting their research." And I said, "So this was pretty tame compared to what you would see when it was time to get hired into a department." And I think that kind of experience framed his view of the faculty, that when he saw that no, this isn't just a sort of hippie commune kind of way, that the faculty care deeply about who's in charge and about what their qualifications are and about whether they're going to be good leaders and how they're going to respond. So, yeah, I think, that unfortunately we don't have enough. We have board member Peterson,
Right.
President Peterson. His wife actually came to an ethics bowl team that I'm co-coach of. And she was very impressed with our students, and she got to see that. But I haven't had any board member themselves come to a class or something.
And this is for all three of you, since you're up here. Why did you get into higher education? And
Summers off and
you know what? That is exactly a
When people
public,
listen, that's good. Like,
public
you're
perception. These guys don't work that
We don't
hard.
work
They
that,
get
yeah.
whole summer off. They don't teach on Fridays. They don't teach on
Yeah,
Mondays. That's
That is the opinion of the public.
That is,
of
yeah.
course it is.
But, I came from a totally different culture where professors were basically worshipped. I mean, they are held in such high
esteem, yes.
esteem that when I was a student, as an undergraduate student in Turkey, if you have a jacket on, when you see a professor, you have to button down your jacket and everything. And it was even written on this Fulbright Scholars 10 things to know about, like going to Turkey on a study abroad program. An American Fulbright student wrote that, like, in Turkey they worship professors. And so
You wanted to be worshipped.
I wanted to be worshipped, and I wasn't expecting this. And I think also, for example, in Turkey, they value educators in general. There's even a Turkish saying, if you teach me one letter, I will be your servant for 40 years, kind of thing. I don't know how that translates, but that's basically how it is. So teachers, even in high schools, middle schools, are respected. So for me, being a professor was something really valuable. And they also get paid better considering the economic conditions of the general jobs in Turkey and in some other countries. So I didn't realize that professors are just so looked down upon here. And it shocked me because, these are people who educate your kids.
Yes.
And those kids are going to be ruling this country in the next 10, 20 years. So professors are basically creating the future of the country.
Mm-hmm. Why did you?
My mom's a teacher, or she just retired, and so I knew that I probably wanted to do something as an educator, but actually there was a show on the History Channel called The History of Sex, and I loved that show, and I wrote down on a piece of yellow paper all the talking heads, like their names and where they were located. And I looked them up on the internet back in the day and saw they're all professors.
Mm-hmm.
People can study this for a living? That's awesome. So I knew that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to study gender and sexuality and stuff like that, and just decided I wanted to be a gender studies major at UT Dallas, and then just worked my way up to PhD of sociology, and I knew this was what I wanted to do. This was my calling. So.
I actually started as an electrical engineering major.
Oh.
And I always thought I was going to be an engineer for years and years, and realized that engineering and I weren't working out after my first year. Did miserably. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go into math or something else. And I took an intro to philosophy class with Professor Rosenberg at Cleveland State, and I was in the class for 2 weeks. We hadn't read a primary source material at all, and part of what my dissatisfaction with engineering was I didn't get to ask the question why. So a lot of it was, follow the formula.
Right.
And it was I was doing calculus, and I went to my uncle who's an engineer for some help, and I did the problem, and he goes, yeah, you got it. And I go, yeah, but why do I do it? He said, well, you just follow the formula. You just do what you, and that wasn't satisfying. So I was looking for something else, and I'd had some interest in a little bit in politics and political things, but it was really that first philosophy class, and I sat down in the class 2 weeks in, and I was looking for another major. I was thinking, and this professor blew me away, just looking at things from multiple perspectives, the questions. And so I went home, and I told my parents I switched my major. And they said, oh, that's great. What'd you figure? I'm sure they were thinking math or something else. I said philosophy. Hadn't read a primary source, by the way. This was all secondary source at this point. And I actually just fell in love with the subject matter. I liked asking the questions. I liked reading the material. I actually enjoyed writing papers and making the arguments. Mm-hmm. So really, for me, being a professor, I think too many times, and this is not to insult teachers, I'm not a teacher, I'm a professor. I enjoy teaching, I love interacting with students, but also I enjoy doing research. I enjoy reading, writing, presenting papers at conferences. That is why I became a professor, because I want to be able to do that research, to keep, to look, study those ideas, learn new things, present, publish. So really it's the combination. And honestly, I really do enjoy the whole thing of being a professor. But to Taji's point, when I was in graduate school, when I was in my PhD program, a fellow graduate student who was a master's student, her parents from India were in town, or they lived in Toronto. They would go back and forth, but they were Canadians at that point. When she introduced them to me, this is Mark, he's in the PhD program, they treated me like I was already a professor, like the esteem that professor. So that was the first time anywhere I'd ever gotten that kind of reaction, and this was some parents who look. But I got to say that all that aside, I really just love being a professor. I love the intellectual activity, I love the writing, I love those sorts of things. So, it pains me to see what's becoming that when you start to treat the university as a sort of, widget factory or putting out just workers where there's this rich intellectual community. That's what I went into this for.
And the reason I ask that is because you have to, at some point, take SB1 personally. It has to hurt personally because you've dedicated your lives to educating young minds to help expand thinking. And then you see this legislation coming out from Columbus that basically devalues you.
Yeah, one of the things I was most frustrated about was I wanted to meet with my state senator beforehand, and he just wouldn't meet with me. We met afterward to discuss SB1 and why he supported it, etc. But I'm like, you didn't talk to any professors before signing on to this. You didn't meet with YSU OEA before signing on to this. And that was disheartening.
This is one thing, if you are going to discuss an important topic, for example, on television or on a podcast in Turkey, you always have to find the experts, and they're
Right.
always the professors, at least the legitimate ones. They always invite experts from universities, professors who know the subject, who has been studying that topic for many, many years, because those are the people who dedicated their lives to that, and they know much more than anybody else can know about it. So not even having one single professor before you start writing up this bill.
Right.
Well, I
that's
mean,
amazing.
I think Jerry Serino, he was on the board of trustees at Lakeland.
Community College.
So I think he has a belief that he knows how the sausage is made and how things are done. But I also realized that much of the language in the bill was not his, it was by the National Association of Scholars. So he and the others would rather listen to a conservative think tank than the people in Ohio.
Yeah, but to your point, it is, I try to remain fairly stoic about these things as much as I can, but there is a devaluing of what, if you look at the people who are teaching, if you look at the professors, it takes years to get where we are. You've got at least 4-year, many people 5-year undergrad, a lot of times a 2-year master's program, plus 4 or 5, sometimes 6 years to get your PhD. So you're looking at 12, 13 years of higher education before you can even get your foot in the door. And that's assumed, and then of course there's the process you go through of teaching part-time at places, or you get postdocs, or you've got to publish, and so all of this, including, one thing that's left out is that the first 6 years you can be fired at any time in the first 6 years of your university. So there is control. The administration and these things do have control over it. If they see someone not performing or not doing, they've got those 6 years to evaluate them. And then to do all of that and to commit to your students for years and years, you're supporting students and helping students. And YSU, I fully recognize that we get students who are working and are non-traditional, and we get a lot. So you do put that extra effort in to help those students. And then to have someone come along and say that all you've been doing is, you've been striking. YSU has had 3 days of strike in 25 years, 2 of which were on non-teaching days. To be accused of indoctrinating, accused of, that you're taking money out of their pocket, at some point it is insulting. And then it's the devaluing of expertise, like Taji's really saying. That's really what it is. It's that we don't care about, you hear them saying, we just need to teach critical thinking. Well, you know what? I didn't spend 13 years studying critical thinking. I study social and political philosophy, ethics. She's studying sociology, gender. Taji, each of us can look at our areas and say, I spent a lot of time studying, there's value in this as well. So you've devalued it and said that, well, it's all the same. We can replace any one of you because all you're really teaching is critical. No, we're not. There's value in discipline. There's value in the music instructors. There's value in the art instruction. All of those people have spent an immense amount of time becoming very good at what they do. And that does, at a certain point, that does become personal. Like that's when you've devalued it. My colleagues and other people around me, and I'm going, do you have any clue what we do? Like you said, did anyone sit in a classroom? Did anyone come and ask you a question about what it's, what challenges you face? What research are you doing? Where have you published? none of those things have been asked to show the value of what you do in its totality.
I mean, the value of what we do is essentially supposed to be, I think our credentials are supposed to be published on the websites now.
Yeah.
So
That is
like
part of it.
that's all we stand for is like, okay, well you have the letters behind your name, therefore.
Yeah,
That-
and we're
yeah.
replaceable, and as if each individual
Right.
is replaceable, right? You can we'll put a part-time person in there, or a lecturer in there, and that it does start to, it does start to sort of get at you a little bit. At that point, there is a certain amount of, you start to take it a little personally.
And, as a journalist for almost 50 years, when I hear this Donald Trump talk about fake news, it's a personal insult because I know what we went through. I know what I did when I was in Selma, Alabama as a reporter for 3 years. I mean, it's you dedicate yourself to a profession and then have somebody demean it with one line, and that's
All based on hearsay.
Exactly, and that's what I see as SB1 is some guy decides, I'm going to redefine higher education in Ohio, and that's it. And then all of a sudden, everybody follows, and the Republican supermajority decides, okay, we're going to do it. And then the governor, who knows better, he does, because
Yeah.
I've known DeWine for 40 years when he first came on the political scene. He knows better, and he signs it.
But and speak, maybe it's as a person, but as an academic, as a philosopher, as speaking in that sort of term, is that what makes it even harder is that it's not even as if there is actual evidence or data that you've identified a real problem. Like you can look at journalism and say, look, the majority of journalists I've seen are honest to goodness, honest to goodness, good people looking to present the facts of what's going on, are trying to present it in a way that's not biased, and you sort of setting aside your Fox News is, I think the majority of journalists are, they're an important part of what goes on. And then you come along and say, you paint with one broad brush, all journalists are this, all media is this. That to me, I look at that and I go, where's the evidence for that? And that's what really right. If there was a real problem, then identify it, make your case to me, make the argument to me, and show me that this is a reasonable way of addressing that problem. Nothing like that's going on with SB1. Like there's no data to back. There's no support. There's no widespread
Especially
student
Ohio-based data.
Especially Ohio, and nothing from student complaints. And here's what we have these rampant complaints from students and parents about what's going on and and you go, that's not happening. So what? And that again, as someone who wants reasons and arguments, and I've had to learn to adapt to not getting those reasons and arguments, it's hard, is that sometimes that's what's most frustrating, is that if you were, at least we have if you came in my classroom and said, I'm basing this on intuition, I'm like, well, okay, that, and what is it now, $2.50 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Like that, that really that's the part that really, really gets me going, is that sort of irrational approach to this.
Anything else?
Do you guys feel that if Senate Bill 1 is allowed to stand, it may come back and bite conservatives in the other way? Because, for example, SB1 mandates that you have to include speakers of opposing views in your classroom when you're teaching controversial topics. And let's say the government changed and we have a less conservative government. Could they also come and say, okay, these professors are teaching very conservative views. You have to have some opposing views in your classroom. I don't know how that looks like.
Oh, absolutely.
By the way.
I'm waiting for somebody in the business school to start teaching Marxism and socialism because it's an alternate economic system that's been underrepresented in our business school for years. So I don't know about you, but yeah, that, and people have pointed that out. They've said that. They've said that, this can equally be applied. You like it now because you're in the majority in the House, in the State House, or you have the majority of board members. And I think that's a completely valid sort of point or valid question. Like, is it going to flip the other way? So, which is why I think there needs to be a certain amount of independence of the universities, right? That the state should stay out of that micromanaging of the university.
Well, we've come to the end, and I appreciate the time and all of that. But as Taji pointed out, one of the challenges you face is that a lot of people don't read, they don't watch the news, they don't pay attention to what's going on. So in order to persuade those people that this is an issue that not only should they sign the petitions, but should be involved in and actively. Give me a soundbite, each of you, as to why why this is important.
I hate soundbite. You're asking the guy who writes 20-page papers.
I realize that, but that's I'm sorry, but
it's hard.
We are in the soundbite society. That's.
I mean, you know,
I would say this is important because the people, like I said before, the people who should be deciding the future of higher education in Ohio are the voters and not the super gerrymandered General Assembly that pushed this through based on a conservative think tank that is not based in Ohio, has not done studies of Ohio. So Ohioans, I trust them to know best what's best for higher education as opposed to Jerry Serino thinking he knows what's best for higher education.
I would say this is an attack on workers' rights. It's bad for faculty. It's bad for the retention and attraction of quality faculty. It's bad for students. It takes resources away from students, and it also makes it harder for students to get through their 4 years at the university without the support that they've been getting so far. So I think that all aspects of this bill can be boiled down to it's bad for faculty, it's bad for students, and ultimately it's going to be bad for Ohio.
And the elimination of DEI, I mean, it's also bad for veterans, right? People who are affected by DEI policies are not just...
The majority of people benefit from DEI. It's not just a matter of race and ethnicity. It includes things like veteran status, being a first-generation college student, being an athlete on campus, being a pregnant person on campus. That is all trying to level the playing field for those students so that they don't have to face as many obstacles in the classroom. Krishana likes to say the opposite of diversity is homogeneity, the opposite of inclusion is segregation, the opposite of equity is inequity. So we need diversity, equity, and inclusion on campus. And so that people can feel like they belong. University resources used to be dedicated to make sure that their students felt a part of the university community. You know, at YSU would be felt wide and proud, but
people don't understand how much that inclusion part of DEI impacts students. Because, you know, especially for international students, which I was one of them, on campus, you want to feel like you belong there and you're included.
We're not expending these massive resources to have an international student center that's open to international students so they have a place to go to help navigate culturally and even just very simple things like even logistics of where to go to shop and understanding things that they might feel more comfortable talking with their fellow international students about as opposed to having to ask someone out. And that's just support. That's inclusiveness. That's support for students. And you know,
and it's not giving them a leg up.
Right. They're not getting anything more. In fact, they're getting to the point where, you know, I had international students this semester in my data ethics class, a graduate level course. And one of the things they mentioned to me was that they were from India. One of the things they mentioned is that they don't challenge their professors in India. There was more, the professor teaches, they receive the information, and that's it. And if there's a question, fine, but you don't debate things back and forth. And I said, well, you're going to have to get used to it in my class. But I didn't realize the cultural difference. Now, that's the kind of thing that I could get training to help those students feel more comfortable and get, you know, and also to be equal participants in the class, where the majority of students who spoke were not the international students. And I had to pull it out, but I didn't even realize the first few weeks in class that they weren't talking because they were on their phones or they were, you know, distracted. It was because that's not what they thought the culture of the class was. They just assumed that they'd take down notes and go. And so I had to pull those sort of comments out of them. But again, it doesn't take away from anyone. It doesn't cost the university a bunch of resources, and it helps retain those students and help them to be successful.
I think that's a big misunderstanding too, that people think the DEI offices are taking a lot of resources from the university or spending a lot of money. I don't think they actually do, spend any money.
And you're far more likely to get the benefits of that student retention, right? So whatever you're investing in those things are going to pay off by those students remaining at the university, spending their full 4 years there, paying the tuition and being successful.
Perhaps even becoming donating alumni.
Donating alumni, right? So the long term, if you keep looking at everything from the short term, but a long term is, no, this is better overall. So that small investment you make here with limited amount of resources, you got those offices and those programs, they're going to pay off.
But not only in terms of those, but like having a scholarship to get more black educators in the classroom,
Right.
K-12 educators. By
That's
eliminating
gonna be
that scholarship, you're hurting the community overall because we need more educators of color in the classroom. So you're not just, like, oh, well, I'm taking away the money from them so that they're not going to be able to afford their college degree as successfully. No, you're hurting the kids who need to see role models as they're
From
coming
their
up
own
K through 12.
community.
Yeah,
And
from their own
the
communities,
doctors
so.
the doctors and nurses who I've heard from at Ohio State who've contacted us. One wrote a great little op-ed for the Columbus Dispatch and also was on our Substack newsletter, talked about the importance of diversity training for different communities so that doctors can better serve the communities that they go into. And that training, which is mandatory training for doctors, or at least it is until this goes into effect, they're saying that there's a value in this, that it leads to better outcomes for patients. So you're hurting, again, we don't realize that there's a long-term cost to these things and I think the thing that I've said in a number of groups, diversity, equity, and inclusion is not affirmative action. Everybody seems to equate one with the other, that somehow you're taking from one or you're giving a spot. That's not what DEI is. It's not affirmative action, but it is a way to help students. It's a way to help communities. There's a number of benefits from it. It's all of these other things that we've been talking about. And that's what I think is one of the problems, is that people aren't going to see just how the sort of negative impact this is going to be. For a couple of years down the road, suddenly you're seeing less successful students, international students, less LGBTQ support, and those students being less doctors who are better trained to serve their communities. That's the impact it could have in Ohio.
But the reality is, all of those are not the constituency of the supermajority of Republicans in Columbus.
You said that. I'm not.
Yes,
I will leave it. Okay.
That's the problem. The problem is they're responding to their own constituencies, and they don't see what we've been talking about as being important to them. They don't see diversity as important. They don't see more minority faculty members as being important. They don't see more international students as being important to higher education. I mean, they're looking through. They have their blinders on.
There's a lot of this too, that you make it less inviting here. Students go elsewhere, and like a lot of students, I have family members, nephew, who goes away to school in Chicago, ends up getting an internship in Chicago, ends up staying in Chicago, right? If you keep people in Ohio, and we're facing the demographic cliff. I mean, we really want to attract international students. We want to attract students from out of state. They come here, they feel a part of the campus, a part of the community, and then they stay here and they raise families and they get jobs and they contribute to the economy. I'm like, how is that not in the interest of, even if your whole focus is business interest and economics, you want to bring as many people here as possible and keep them here. And SB1 does the exact opposite. Right?
Yeah.
It works against that.
So before we finish, I want to ask, how can the community help with your petition campaign? What can we do?
The best thing to do would be to go to our website, ohsb1petition.com. And there you see a link for where to sign the petition. That's at the top of the page. There's also a link to volunteer if you want to get involved that way. We have a t-shirt now. If you would like to donate, that is very helpful as well. So right now what we need are signatures, as well as volunteers willing to get out there and help collect signatures.
You have to sign the paper petition.
Yes, you do. Yes, there is. Just to be clear to everyone, there is no online signing of a petition. I know we're all used to online, but yeah, you have to do that in person.
You have to sign the paper petition. You have to be a registered voter. In Ohio.
Yeah.
So, a registered voter in Ohio. Yeah.
And
so-
you have to sign it the way your signature appears with the
In
Board of
your-
Yes.
Elections.
And
So there's no sort of question as
where
to
can people
legitimacy.
go to find out where to sign?
OHSB1petition.com.
Okay, so it lists all the.
There's a link there for
There's a
everybody to
link
check.
that has what's called an Airtable. It's sort of like an Excel sheet that updates daily with all the locations on it.
What's the deadline that you're working towards
We are
for
turning
submitting?
in all the signatures on June 25th, but we will probably stop signature collection itself on June 22nd. Like, if there's still collecting going on, it would have to be few and far between because we got to get them scanned in and then down to Columbus and then,
Boxed and shipped over and
get a U-Haul, all
Yeah,
that sort of
that's
stuff. So, yeah, a lot of work ahead still.
Well, best of luck.
Thank
If we can do anything else, if you'd like to, if you see the need to want to come back and further make the
Well,
case.
when we get it
you know.
on the ballot,
Yes.
then
Yeah,
yes, we will
definitely,
have to
yeah,
come
definitely.
back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much.